Good morning, everyone. First of all, I just want to say a huge thank you for being as interested in my topic as I have been. It means a lot to me that you're watching my presentation. And before I start, I thought I would maybe briefly introduce myself. My name is Sneha, and I am a master's in counseling student. Um, and a bit of my background. I've always chosen something with psychology in it. It's something that I have a lot of passion in. It's something that I have a lot of interest in. I think it began when, back home in UAE, we don't really have. Well, there's a lot of awareness now, and there's a lot of change now. But I would say that a few years ago, even now, like the awareness is still not to the extent that I think it should be, and it can be quite expensive to um, get therapy, get any sort of therapeutic help, and for that very reason, usually people talk about therapy in a very different context, like it's something that's reserved for people who have that sort of money, who have that sort of wealth. So it's a little, yeah, the scene is a little saddening, but it's something that I've always been interested in, and that's how I got to the position that I am in now, and the topics that I will be exploring today, as you can see on the screen right now: social anxiety, burnout, and social connectedness in trainee counselors specifically. All three of these topics speak to me personally, especially social anxiety. Um, Social anxiety is something that I used to struggle with quite a lot. It's much more manageable now, and with personal therapy, it has helped me a lot. But it was something I genuinely thought, thinking about how other people were thinking about me was something that I genuinely was genuinely on my mind all the time. And yeah, it's something that speaks to me. It's something that, and now that I'm in the position that I am, and seeing clients who also suffer through similar situations, it really is, it's really sad to see that, we a lot of us sometimes have those moments, or many of us have it in quite the extreme end, where we're always concerned about, I wonder if that person's laughing at me, I wonder if they're judging me right now, feelings like that. So social anxiety, and those were some of the feelings that I myself used to struggle with. So it's something that I personally identify with, and that's really how it began. That I really want to see how it would look like specifically in trainee counselors, because it's kind of a interesting position, because you are a counselor, which means that you'll be working with clients who have those things, but at the same time you're a trainee and you're starting off, so you're still gonna have some of the anxiety, but then you're also working with clients who feel that way. So it's an interesting position, and that's really how I came onto this topic. And with a bit of research, the other two topics that you can see here, burnout and social connectedness, came about. um, and I thought I would just briefly introduce that. So, burnout in itself, it kind of refers to this sort of situation where you're like mentally exhausted by a really long period of stress, where you just and you don't know how to really cope with it or deal with it. So you kind of sometimes shut down. A lot of people turn off. A lot of people, because the thing is, burnout usually occurs in like a work context. It can even be academic, but mainly work. So people just go to work, they completely shut down, shut themselves off. They just do what's needed, and coming back home and things like that. And this is especially like a concern in any helping profession, because you're working with people directly and you're helping them. And if you're a trainee, if you're also a trainee, that adds like an extra vulnerability in how you're feeling, while also having social anxiety. So, and sometimes social anxiety can actually increase that sort of feeling, or this and that sort of burnout that you're experiencing. It can be also called occupational burnout. But yeah, so as you can see here, it is something that's recognized among trainee counselors, volunteers in general, those, not seeing much of a reward in that you don't really get paid, but you get reward in a different way. But and also it's something, there's something. And another thing that you might have heard in recent years or even months is the word self-care, because it's pretty popular in pop psychology, but it's also a really important thing for trainee counselors, and I would say anyone in general, but especially for trainee counselors, because at the end of the day, it's kind of like being a vessel that holds in um, people's people's emotions, people's situations, and many things like that. So, so what happens when that vessel kind of starts having cracks in it? That's really what we're looking at here. So, one of the most popular ways to kind of deal with that, or one of the most popular self-care, I would say, is to actually be with people who you feel like you belong to. And that is what the social connectedness referred to, like a community that accepts you. And a community, it could be friends, it could be people around you, yeah, it could be anything, just loved ones, but you feel as though that's where your heart is, kind of a homely feeling. So that's where the social connectedness comes in, and it's something that has been found to kind of mitigate some of that social anxiety and sometimes even the burnout. So that's how I came to the research question that, how do they actually interact with each other, specifically in trainee counselors, all three of them. And I had three hypotheses that I really want to test. With one of them being that social anxiety is positively correlated with burnout. So, if you're someone who has social anxiety, there's a good chance that you will also be experiencing a high level of burnout. So if you're high in social anxiety, you'll be high in experiencing burnout. And my second hypothesis was that if you're socially anxious, then you will, then the fact that you actually have a connection with the people that you're around, which is the social connectedness, will mitigate, in a sense, also, not mitigate, that's the wrong word, but also there's a chance that you'll experience lower levels of burnout, if you're someone who has high social anxiety. My third was that if you're someone who has no social anxiety, then your level of experiencing that social connectedness will be the same as experiencing burnout. So those were the three hypotheses that I wanted to look at. So to bring this into fruition, what I first did was to get the ethics approval from the Bangor University Ethics Committee. So I submitted um, my hypotheses, how I'm going to conduct them, and many other procedures to them, and I got a favorable outcome, meaning that I could go ahead with my studies. And what I basically did was to give a questionnaire to people. So there were three questionnaires in them. First was the burnout measurement. Second was the social connectedness measurement, and third was the social phobia. Social phobia inventory is the name, but social anxiety measurement. So as you can see here, first participants had to answer 12 questions from the burnout assessment tool, which was from Lee and Robbins, and basically there were 12 questions that asked them things like, I feel emotionally exhausted at work and things like that, and they would have to answer on a Likert scale, and for the next question, it was a social connectedness scale. It's a revised version because there's quite a few different versions of those scales, and yeah, so that was a 20 item questionnaire. So there was 20 questions with again a Likert scale of how people felt based on the different questions. Like I feel comfortable with other people, and the third scale that I used was a SPIN, or social phobia inventory, by Connor and colleagues. Another scale that, and it looks at social anxiety, like measuring social anxiety in specific, if if authority figures scare you, and many other questions like that. The questions itself was taken through or well it was the data collection was done through Sona system of Bangor. So we got some of our participants from Sona. We got some of our participants from other social media websites like Instagram and WhatsApp, and we got about 60 more than 64 responses. But after deleting some incomplete responses, we ended up with 64 responses of trainee counselors. They were required to be trainee counselors. So if you were not one, you couldn't be a part of it, because I was specifically looking at this variable. So that's how I started the research. Once the data collection was done, I collected everything. Again, like I said, I've removed some of the data that was incomplete, or was in the extreme. And once that was done, I put it through SPSS, did the data, um, look for look for correlations between all the three variables, and specifically for socially anxious and non-socially anxious. Um, and what I found was that there was a statistical significant positive correlation between social anxiety and burnout. So this kind of was showing that if you were socially anxious, there was a good chance, there was a high chance that you were also experiencing a high level of burnout. And however, the other two hypotheses were not supported in a statistically significant sense. Um, social connectedness did not show a significant relationship with burnout in any of the other hypotheses. But the non-anxious group, the people who had no social anxiety, the relationship was in the opposite direction that I thought it would go in. And that was a really interesting result to obtain. And so So, as the results suggested, there seemed to be like a really clear link between social anxiety and burnout, specifically within trainee counselors. And another thing was that out of the 64 participants, 36 of them did score high on the social phobia inventory scale, which would suggest that they had more symptoms of social anxiety. 36 of them, and only 28 of them were much more on the lower scale, which suggested that they were non-socially anxious, which is a really interesting finding within trainee counselors. And this finding itself is consistent in that, in many of the cognitive models of anxiety, one of the biggest things is that social anxiety causes you to be really critical of yourself, and being in that state all the time can actually be exhausting, and emotional exhaustion is one of the other things that work with burnout. So when you add, if you think about what trainee counselors do, that burnout and that social anxiety can interact in really harmful ways. But what was more interesting was that social connectedness, like I mentioned, usually helps mitigate some of that. But this was not something that I found to be true in my findings. But of course, there could be different reasons for it. One could be that maybe there's something about researching about it even more than what we have available. It could be that within this specific population or ethnicity, it wasn't valid, or it could also be that the measurement tool itself might not measured it specifically, because a social connectedness scale talks about feelings of belonging, but not the other things like the training environment. But it could also be that the number of participants being quiet on the lower scale could also have caused some of the extra effects. Um, and of course, this just goes to show that trainee counselors of all people might actually need more support than they're given. A lot of places here kind of depend on trainee counselors to. Of course, there's a give and take going on where you get hours with being a trainee counselor, but also are you being supported enough within whatever organization that the trainee counselors are working in. Is there something about giving more support than they already have? Can they uh, can they be given better support? And as you can see, I've made a graph here which shows the link between social anxiety and burnout. Each person on the graph, like each dot you see, is a person, and usually in this line kind of shows that there is that bit of that positive relationship happening here, that if you had higher social anxiety, you also had a higher level of burnout, even though it does not explicitly mean the reason you had burnout is because you had high social anxiety. Um, So, again, something that I found interesting about these findings was that this does kind of actually bring forth should we be taking the social anxiety much more seriously than it is experienced, and to make sure that trainee counselors like me are more seen and understood, and that we feel more emotionally safe within whatever organization we're working in, so that we don't experience burnout as quickly, or if there is, how can that be mitigated? And that was something that I found really interesting about my findings. Here are some of the references that I used, and please feel free to ask me any questions if you have any. And thank you so much for coming again.